Rain whispered across the windshield as Ethan Ward's car climbed the narrow dirt road to the old Watterson farmhouse. The GPS signal had died 10 minutes ago, leaving him alone with the static hum of the radio and the rhythmic squeak of the wipers. He preferred it that way. Silence had always been his comfort, even when the world called him a man who hunted the dead. Ethan wasn't a believer. Not really. Not after 15 years of investigating hauntings that always turned out to be bad plumbing, faulty wiring, or lonely people desperate for meaning. Fear, he'd learned, was a language, one most people didn't know they were speaking. But the Watterson case was different. He'd read the file on the flight from Boston. A family of 5 vanished without a trace one November night in 1978. No bodies. No struggle. Dinner plates still on the table, lights left on, even the dog's leash hanging by the door. The police called it a mass disappearance. The newspapers called it a curse. Now, almost 50 years later, the new owners, a historical research group, wanted Ethan to spend a week inside the house, record everything, and confirm whether the property could be safely opened to the public. He parked near the sagging porch and stepped into the misty air. The house loomed ahead, its windows black and hollow. A private property, sign dangled on one hinge. The silence here wasn't ordinary. It was heavy, thick, like the air itself remembered something. Ethan adjusted his camera bag and spoke softly into his recorder. Case 247. Watterson property. Arrival time. 8:42 p.m. Conditions. Rain, low visibility. First impressions. Structure stable but neglected. Initial feeling, unease. The front door resisted, swollen from years of rain, then groaned open. The scent hit him first, stale wood, mold, and something faintly metallic. He flicked on his flashlight, catching motes of dust swirling like ash. Furniture still sat in place, a sofa covered in yellowed sheets, a grandfather clock frozen at 11:59, picture frames turned face down on a mantel. He started setting up his equipment, motion sensors, EMF meter, infrared cameras. His process was methodical, almost ritualistic. Science before superstition. Facts before fear. In the kitchen, he noticed something odd. The table was still set for 5, plates covered in a fine layer of dust. A single glass stood at the edge, tilted but never fallen. He frowned. Maybe this is what happens when life just stops, he muttered. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills. Later that night, after unpacking his sleeping bag in the living room, Ethan began his first audio log. No immediate signs of paranormal activity. House is in remarkable condition given the neglect. Minor electrical fluctuations. Could be old wiring. I'll run diagnostics tomorrow. He paused, eyes wandering toward the staircase. The top was swallowed in shadow, and yet for a moment, he thought he saw movement. Just a shift of darkness against darker darkness. He blinked. Nothing. Maybe I'm just tired, he whispered into the recorder. He turned off the flashlight and lay back, listening to the rain. It was a long drive. He needed rest. But the house had other plans. Around 1 a.m., he woke suddenly. Not from a sound, but from the absence of one. The rain had stopped. The wind had gone still. The entire world outside seemed to have paused. He checked his watch. 1 a.m. sharp. The grandfather clock, the one that hadn't worked in decades, ticked once. Loud. Then again. And again. Ethan sat up, heart thudding. No power, he said to himself. How is that? A whisper cut through the air. Soft. Faint. Like someone speaking behind a wall. He froze. Listened. It was a child's voice. A girl. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, pleading. He grabbed his flashlight and aimed it toward the staircase. Hello? Who's there? The light trembled across peeling wallpaper, the edge of a picture frame, and for half a second, what looked like a hand gripping the banister before vanishing. He moved forward slowly, every creak of the floorboards echoing through the house. His pulse beat in his ears. No hand. No voice. No one. He scanned the EMF meter. The lights flickered. High readings near the stairs. Then nothing. Faulty wiring, he told himself again, louder this time. But his voice didn't sound convinced. When he returned to his sleeping bag, The clock had stopped again. At exactly 1:03. He sat in silence for a long while, recording nothing, thinking of the missing family. The father, Thomas Watterson, had been a local pastor. The mother, Claire, a teacher. 3 children, ages 8, 10, and 12. Their photos were still on the mantel, faces faded, eyes hollow with time. He found himself staring at the youngest girl's picture. Something about her smile bothered him, not fear, but knowledge. Like she'd seen something before the camera clicked. Something she wasn't supposed to see. Ethan sighed and turned off his recorder. "End of entry," he said softly. "I'll continue in the morning." He didn't sleep again that night, because just before dawn, the recorder, which he'd switched off hours earlier, clicked on by itself. A low voice, not his own, whispered through the static. "You shouldn't have come back." By morning, the storm had cleared. The sunlight filtering through the cracked windows turned the dust into drifting gold. It looked peaceful, almost too peaceful, like the house was pretending to be ordinary again. Ethan replayed the recorder several times while sipping cold coffee from his thermos. The whisper he'd captured was faint but undeniable, not a glitch, not feedback. A voice. Male. Gravelly. And the words, "You shouldn't have come back." He had no explanation. Ethan prided himself on explanations. He ran every technical test he knew. Battery check, interference scan, waveform analysis. All normal. But the timestamp bothered him. The device had recorded at 3:17 a.m. He'd been awake then, staring at the ceiling, and he remembered no sound, no whisper, no movement. Just silence. Something wasn't adding up. He began a systematic sweep of the house. Ground floor first, kitchen, study, hallway, cellar door. Each step stirred up the smell of decay and rain-soaked wood. His EMF meter chirped near the cellar entrance. High reading. He crouched, touching the door. Cold as ice. When he turned the handle, it refused to move. Locked from the inside. He leaned closer. For a moment, he thought he heard breathing behind it. Shallow, irregular. Then the sound stopped. He stepped back, forcing a laugh. Old pipes. Air pressure. Nothing more. But his hands were trembling as he said it. That afternoon, he reviewed the Watterson files again. He needed context, something rational. The police reports mentioned the cellar several times. Traces of blood on the steps, and a note found pinned to the inside of the door. The note's handwriting matched the father's, Thomas Watterson. The text was simple, yet chilling. "We heard it call our names." Ethan closed the folder. His reflection in the laptop screen looked pale, older somehow. He shut the device and went to check the cameras he'd placed around the house. The first few feeds were ordinary, flickering dust motes, shifting light. But the upstairs camera, the one facing the children's bedroom, showed something different. At exactly 1 a.m., the door creaked open on its own. Then, a small figure crossed the room, just a blur at first, the size of a child. It paused near the window, facing the camera. The shape was too indistinct to make out a face, but the outline of its head tilted, as if looking right at him. Then the feed cut to static. Ethan rewound, paused, enhanced the frame. The moment the figure faced the lens, the temperature in the room dropped several degrees. He saw his breath fog in front of him, though the fire was burning nearby. He whispered to himself, "That's not possible." By evening, he convinced himself to stay one more night. That was the rule, 3 days minimum before calling any site active. He'd done hundreds of these, but none had felt like this. At 10:30 p.m., he began his next log. Second night, temperature fluctuations. Electromagnetic interference near the cellar and upper hallway. One possible apparition captured on video. No auditory responses since last entry. I will perform an EVP session in the children's room. He set the recorder on the dusty dresser and began. "Is anyone here with me?" No response. What happened to the Watterson family? Silence. Then a faint tap from the corner of the room. He looked up. A wooden toy horse, long abandoned, was rocking gently back and forth. He approached it slowly, reaching out. Thump. Something hit the ceiling directly above him. Then another thump. Then 3, faster. He bolted downstairs, every footstep echoing through the hollow rooms. The air felt charged, like static before lightning. His EMF meter was screaming, the highest readings he'd ever seen. And then it all stopped. Silence again, complete and suffocating. He realized he'd been holding his breath. When he finally exhaled, the air left his lungs in a shudder. That night, sleep found him only in fragments. In one of those half-dreams, he stood in the upstairs hallway, watching the youngest girl from the photograph, the one with the knowing smile. Her back was to him. She was humming something tuneless and low, swaying gently. "Hey," he whispered. She turned. Her eyes were black pits. Her mouth opened wider than it should have, a gaping, impossible shape. And the voice that came out was not a child's. "We're still here." Ethan jolted awake, drenched in cold sweat. The fire had gone out. The house was completely dark. He checked his recorder, still on. The EVP session had captured something new during the night. A rhythmic, steady sound, like a heartbeat, followed by a single word, "Stay." At dawn, Ethan stumbled to the porch, exhausted. His hands were shaking as he lit a cigarette, his first in years. The air outside was calm, birds singing, sunlight warm against the dew. It almost felt normal. But behind him, through the open door, he swore he heard footsteps pacing the hallway. Measured, slow, like someone waiting for him to come back inside. He thought about packing up and leaving, but something deeper, pride, obsession, maybe guilt, held him there. He needed answers. He needed to prove this wasn't real. So he whispered to the empty house, "One more night. That's all." The wind rose slightly, carrying his words away, and just before he turned back inside, he noticed something scratched faintly into the doorframe, carved decades ago. "It's under the house." The third night began with an unnatural stillness. No wind, no birds, not even the insects sang. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Ethan sat in the parlor, staring at the inscription on the doorframe. "It's under the house." He'd spent most of the day debating whether to check the cellar. Every logical part of his mind screamed no. But logic felt smaller now, fragile, like a candle in a cave too deep for its own light. By 9 p.m., he'd made his decision. He gathered his camera, recorder, flashlight, and crowbar. When he reached the cellar door, it was no longer locked. The latch hung loose, the metal twisted as if melted. Case 247. Time, 9:17 p.m. Entering basement area. Possible evidence of forced corrosion. He murmured into his recorder, though his voice was barely steady. He pushed the door open. A wave of damp, cold air rolled out, thick with rot. His flashlight beam trembled over the steps, concrete streaked with something dark, long dried. He descended slowly, one creaking step at a time. Halfway down, the light flickered. The basement was wider than he expected. Stone walls, low ceiling, old shelves warped with age. In the center stood a wooden table covered in dust, surrounded by 5 wooden chairs. Each one had a name carved into it. Thomas, Claire, James, Anna, Lily, the Watterson family. Ethan's breath caught. The carvings weren't neat. They were frantic, gouged deep into the wood, letters trembling like they'd been carved by shaking hands. Something had happened here, something desperate. He set the recorder on the table and whispered, "If anyone can hear me, I just want to understand. What happened here?" At first, only silence. Then, faintly, the sound of small feet scurrying in the dark. A child's laughter echoed from behind the shelves. Ethan swung the flashlight around. The beam caught a figure for an instant. A little girl standing in the corner, her head tilted, eyes reflecting the light like glass. Then she was gone. The EMF meter screamed. His flashlight died. Darkness swallowed him whole. He turned the camera light on. The weak red glow revealed movement, shadows slipping across the walls, where nothing stood. He heard whispers now, overlapping, murmuring in panic. One voice rose above them all, a man's, trembling with fury. It wanted our names. Ethan's hand shook as he lifted the recorder. "Who are you? What wanted your names?" A long silence. Then, from the farthest corner of the cellar, came a scraping sound. Stone against stone. He followed it with the camera, each step echoing louder than the last, until he saw it. A square section of the floor slightly raised, like a trapdoor covered in dirt. The scraping continued beneath it, rhythmic, impatient. He crouched down, brushing the dust aside. Symbols were carved into the stone, not letters, but crude shapes. Circles inside circles. Hands. Eyes. Mouths. Dozens of mouths. The sound beneath the floor stopped. Then something knocked back. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Ethan stumbled backward. No. No, that's... He tried to rationalize, but his voice broke halfway through the word. The recorder caught everything. His ragged breathing. The trembling. The whisper that followed. You opened it before. Finish it. He didn't recognize the voice. Yet somehow it knew him. The next knock came harder. The floor cracked. A gust of air burst upward, freezing his face. The smell was unbearable, soil rot, and something old enough to have forgotten sunlight. Then, through the widening split in the stone, a hand reached out. Gray. Thin. Wrongly jointed. Ethan screamed and swung the crowbar, smashing the stone back into place. Dust filled the air as he collapsed against the wall, panting. He stayed like that for what felt like hours, until the whispers faded. When he finally looked up, the carvings on the chairs had changed. The names were gone, replaced by 5 new words. We never left the house. He bolted up the stairs, bursting through the cellar door into the kitchen. His flashlight flickered back to life. Every light in the house had turned on lamps, overhead bulbs, even candles that hadn't existed before. The air was thick with voices now. The family's voices, calling to each other, laughing, crying, pleading. Ethan stumbled through the hallway, heart pounding, camera recording wildly. "Leave me alone," he shouted. But the voices only grew louder, echoing through every wall, floor, and vent until the entire house was alive with sound. And beneath it all, deeper, older, came another voice, not human. "You came to prove it wasn't real. Now prove that you are." The front door slammed shut. Windows locked themselves. The temperature plunged. Frost crawled across the glass, spelling a single word from the inside. "Stay." Ethan dropped to his knees, clutching his head as the noise built to a deafening roar. The camera fell to the floor, recording his face lit by flashes of light as shadows twisted around him. Through the chaos, he caught glimpses, the Watterson family, standing behind him, their faces pale and frozen in eternal terror. Their eyes begged for something he couldn't give. Then everything went black. He woke hours later on the floor, surrounded by silence once again. The house was dark, lifeless. His equipment was scattered, batteries dead, time frozen on every device. 3:33 a.m. He looked toward the cellar door. It was closed again, perfectly sealed, and carved into it now, deep and fresh, were 3 words. "You let it out." When the rescue team found Ethan Ward, he was sitting motionless on the porch of the Watterson farmhouse, staring into the morning fog. His eyes were open, unblinking, fixed on the horizon as if waiting for something to rise from it. His equipment was stacked neatly beside him, camera, recorder, crowbar, all covered in dust. The police report later noted his hands were coated in dirt, his nails packed with black soil, as though he'd been digging. When they spoke to him, he didn't respond. He just whispered a single phrase, over and over. "It's under the house." 2 weeks later, Ethan awoke in a hospital room with white walls and fluorescent lights that hummed like insects. The doctors told him he'd been found after 4 days missing. He had no memory of that time. They said he'd suffered exhaustion, dehydration, mild hypothermia. But the real damage, they said, was psychological. He'd insisted there were voices beneath the floor, that something ancient had been sealed there long before the Watterson family ever lived on that land. The medical staff chalked it up to stress, isolation, and trauma from years of working in morbid environments. But Ethan knew better. The footage from his camera had survived barely. Most of it was static and interference, but one frame remained clear, a figure standing behind him in the cellar, taller than a man, featureless except for the hundreds of faint handprints glowing across its skin. He watched that frame again and again, late at night, in his hospital bed. Every time, he felt it move slightly closer. After his discharge, Ethan stopped taking new cases. He shut down his website, deleted his old videos, moved into a small apartment in the city. But he couldn't escape the sound. It started faintly, a thump beneath the floorboards at night, then whispers in the walls. When he tore up the carpet, there was nothing. When he moved apartments, the noises followed. He began recording again, not for work, but for proof that he wasn't losing his mind. On his last tape, dated October 12th, his voice trembles as he speaks. It doesn't stop. The knocking, the whispers. It's not tied to the house. It's tied to me. I brought it back. Then a silence. And finally, a low voice. The same gravelly one from the Watterson recording. You said you didn't believe in us. The tape ends there. The Foundation's report. Months later, the research foundation that had hired Ethan sent a cleanup team to the Watterson property. They found the house partially collapsed, the cellar caved in. Beneath the rubble was a hollow chamber, walls carved with ancient sigils that predated the house by centuries. In the center lay 5 skeletons, their bones fused into the floor as though pulled downward by the earth itself. No trace of Ethan's fingerprints, no sign of forced entry. But they did find one object half buried in the dirt, Ethan's digital recorder. When they played it, the first voice was his, panicked and shaking. I sealed it again. I sealed it. Please, don't dig here. Don't come back. Then static. Then a chorus of voices whispering in unison, men, women, and children, hundreds of them overlapping. We never left the house. The recording ended with a single heartbeat. 1 year later, a YouTube video began circulating among paranormal circles, The Lost Files of Ethan Ward. It was uploaded from an unknown account. The thumbnail was the Watterson farmhouse under a blood-red sunset. The video played grainy footage from Ethan's investigation, his logs, his footage of the girl in the corner, and the final frame from the cellar showing the figure. Except this time, when viewers paused the clip, the figure wasn't behind Ethan. It was behind them. Dozens of commenters claimed to hear whispers through their speakers after watching. A few reported their screens flickering, their devices shutting off on their own. One user wrote that their child woke in the night crying, saying, "There's someone in the walls." The video was removed 3 days later. No source ever traced. Epilogue. The Watterson property remains condemned. Locals say that when the wind dies completely, just before a storm, you can hear voices rising from beneath the ground. Sometimes it's laughter. Sometimes screams. Sometimes it's a man's voice whispering softly. Science before superstition. But those who stay long enough to listen say the whisper always changes, growing deeper, older, until the words twist into something else entirely. You opened it before. Finish it. And if you're unlucky enough to hear those words, they say it means you've been chosen as the next case file, the next entry in The Darkest Paranormal Cases.